The camera sweeps across snow-capped Colorado peaks as dawn breaks golden light, bleeding across a pristine wilderness that promises both beauty and death. They say the mountains keep secrets better than graves. In 1882, beneath these towering peaks, silver flowed like water and men died like flies. The powerful built empires on the bones of the forgotten in silence was worth more than gold. A single gunshot echoes through the valley, shattering the morning stillness. But some secrets refuse to stay buried, and some women refuse to stay silent. Close up, a woman's steady hands loading a Winchester rifle, her eyes reflecting steel and determination. The West was built by men who took what they wanted, but it would be changed by a woman who couldn't be taken. Thunder of approaching hoofbeats, the sharp crack of breaking timber, the whistle of wind through mine shafts that swallow light and hope. In the shadow of Colorado's highest peaks, where silver veins run deep and human lives run cheap, the price of justice was about to come due. Final shot, a stagecoach racing through swirling snow toward an uncertain destiny, and hell was coming with it. The hunter's last stand. The mountain lion's amber eyes locked onto 8-year-old Billy Crawford as he stumbled backward over a fallen log, his fishing pole forgotten in the creek beside him. The massive cat crouched low, muscles coiled like steel springs beneath its tawny coattail, twitching with predatory focus. In the silence of the North Carolina wilderness, even the birds had stopped singing, as if nature itself held its breath. 40 yards away, hidden among the towering pines, Victoria Torrey Blackwood raised her father's Winchester rifle with practiced ease. Her breathing slowed heartbeat, steadying as she sighted down the barrel. The wind was calm, perfect conditions for a clean shot. But with Billy directly in the line of fire, she had only one chance to save the boy's life without ending it herself. "Easy, big fellow," she whispered, more to calm her own nerves than to the cat. The mountain lion's ears flicked, sensing her presence, but not yet locating the threat. Tori shifted her aim slightly, accounting for the animal's potential movement. She'd been tracking this particular cat for 3 days after it killed the Hendersons' prize heifer, but she'd never expected to find it stalking human prey. The cat's haunches bunched as it prepared to spring. Billy let out a terrified whimper, tears streaming down his dirt-streaked face. Time slowed to a crystalline moment where every detail burned itself into Tori's memory, the dappled sunlight filtering through pine needles, the sweet scent of mountain laurel blooming nearby, the way the boy's small hands trembled as he tried to crawl backward through the undergrowth. The Winchester's report echoed through the forest like thunder, sending a flock of crows exploding from their perches in raucous protest. The mountain lion dropped instantly, its powerful body going limp, just 3 feet from where Billy sat frozen in shock. For a heartbeat, the forest remained utterly silent, except for the ringing in Tori's ears. Then Billy Crawford started crying, great gulping sobs of relief and terror mixed together. Tori emerged from her concealment, the rifle held safely across her body, her worn leather boots sure-footed on the uneven ground. She'd been hunting these mountains since she was barely older than Billy, learning woodcraft from her father before consumption took him 2 winters ago. "You're safe now, honey," she said, kneeling beside the trembling boy. Her voice was steady, betraying none of the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "Let's get you home to your mama." She helped Billy to his feet, noting the scratches on his arms from his frantic retreat through the brambles. "Can you walk?" Billy nodded mutely, his wide eyes fixed on the dead cat. Is it really dead?" "Dead as yesterday's newspaper," Tori confirmed, though she kept the rifle ready as she guided the boy away from the carcass. Mountain lions sometimes hunted in pairs, and she wouldn't relax until they were well clear of the area. "Your pa's going to want to come back for the hide. That's a fine specimen, probably 8 feet from nose to tail." As they made their way down the mountain path toward the Crawford homestead, Billy found his voice again. "Miss Tori, you saved my life. Just like in them dime novels about Buffalo Bill and them other heroes." Tori smiled despite herself. "I'm no hero, Billy, just happened to be in the right place at the right time." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. She'd been following the cat's sign for days, studying its patterns, learning its territory. If she hadn't been out here today actively hunting the threat. The Crawford farm came into view as they rounded the final bend, a modest cabin with neat garden plots, and a small barn where smoke rose from the blacksmith forge where Billy's father worked metal for the neighboring farms. Sarah Crawford must have heard the gunshot because she was already standing on the porch, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun, as she watched the path. Billy, Sarah's cry of relief carried across the distance as she recognized her son's figure. She ran toward them, her cotton dress whipping around her legs, her face a mixture of joy and terror as she took in the rifle across Tori's shoulder and the tears still drying on Billy's cheeks. "He's fine, Mrs. Crawford," Tori called out before the woman could work herself into full panic. "Had a close call with a mountain lion up by Willow Creek, but he's not hurt. Just shaken up some." Sarah Crawford wrapped her son in a fierce embrace before turning to face Tori with tears in her own eyes. "You killed it, the cat." "Yes, ma'am. One shot clean and quick. It won't be troubling anyone again." Tori shifted the rifle to her other shoulder, suddenly feeling the weight of the woman's gratitude like a physical thing. "You might want to keep Billy closer to home for a few days, just to be safe. Where there's one cat, there might be another." "Anything," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "Anything you need, Miss Blackwood. Food, mending, anything at all. You saved my boy's life." As Tori made her way back up the mountain to collect the cat's carcass, the hide would bring good money in town, and the meat wouldn't go to waste, she reflected on Sarah Crawford's words. The woman had looked at her with such gratitude, such respect. It was a stark contrast to how most of the marriageable men in the county looked at her with a mixture of fear and bewilderment that a woman could handle a rifle better than most of them could handle a plow. The mountain lion lay where it had fallen, its magnificent coat unmarred, except for the single bullet hole behind its left shoulder. Tori's shot had found its heart, dropping it instantly. She knelt beside the carcass, running her hand along the thick fur. "Sorry, old fellow," she murmured, "but you picked the wrong prey today." As she began the work of field dressing, the animal Tori couldn't shake the feeling that today marked some kind of ending. Billy Crawford would grow up and tell the story of how Victoria Blackwood saved his life, but she suspected it would be one of the last such stories told about her in these mountains. At 26, she was already considered a spinster by local standards, too skilled with weapons and wilderness craft to make any man comfortable enough to propose marriage. The sun was setting behind the western peaks by the time she finished her work, the cat's hide properly prepared, and the meat wrapped for transport. Tomorrow she'd take it all to town, sell what she could, and continue the lonely business of surviving on her own in a world that seemed to have no place for a woman like her. But tonight, as she cleaned her rifle by lamplight in her small cabin, Victoria Blackwood allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She'd saved a child's life today, used her skills for something that mattered. Whatever the future held, she'd always have that. The proposal problem. The knock on Tori's cabin door came just after dawn, when the mountain air still held the crisp bite of an October morning. She opened it to find Jeremiah Hancock standing on her porch, hat in his hands, and nervous sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool weather. Behind him, tied to her fence post, stood the finest horse she'd ever seen him ride, clearly borrowed for the occasion. "Morning, Miss Blackwood," Jeremiah said, his voice cracking slightly on her name. At 32, he was the most eligible bachelor in 3 counties, owner of a prosperous general store and 200 acres of prime farmland. He was also, Tori realized with a sinking heart, about to become suitor number 6. "Morning, Jeremiah. Coffee's fresh if you'd like some." She stepped back to let him enter, though every instinct told her this conversation would go exactly like the 5 before it. The pattern was always the same: nervous small talk, awkward compliments about her unusual capabilities, followed by a proposal that sounded more like a business arrangement than a declaration of love. Jeremiah accepted their coffee but barely touched it, his hands trembling slightly as he set the cup on her rough-hewn table. "Miss Blackwood, Tori, I've been giving this considerable thought for some time now." "Have you?" she asked, settling into her father's old chair and trying to look encouraging. Jeremiah was a good man, honest and hardworking. If she had to marry someone, and the dwindling funds in her father's lockbox suggested that time was rapidly approaching, she could do worse than Jeremiah Hancock. "Yes, indeed." He cleared his throat and launched into what was clearly a rehearsed speech. "You're a fine woman, capable and spirited. With your father gone, God rest his soul, you need a man to provide for you, to protect you. And I believe we could make a good partnership." There it was again, partnership. Not love, not passion, not even companionship. Partnership, like she was a business venture he was considering investing in. "That's very kind of you, Jeremiah, but—" "I know what you're thinking," he interrupted, warming to his theme. "You're thinking about your unusual interests, your hunting and such. Well, I want you to know that I wouldn't expect you to give all that up. while you could hunt rabbits for the dinner table, help with the farming during harvest season. Your skills wouldn't go to waste. Tori blinked. Rabbits? Well, yes, nothing too dangerous, of course. A woman shouldn't be traipsing through the mountains alone tracking large game. It's not proper. But rabbits, squirrels, maybe a deer now and then, if I was along to supervise. The coffee suddenly tasted bitter in her mouth. Yesterday, she'd killed a mountain lion with a single shot, saved a child's life, and field-dressed a 150-pound carcass with the efficiency of a professional hunter. Today, Jeremiah Hancock was generously offering to let her shoot rabbits under his supervision. I appreciate the offer, Jeremiah, I truly do. But I don't think we'd suit. She stood moving toward the door in a clear dismissal. You need a wife who wants the same things you do. I'm afraid that's not me. Jeremiah's face cycled through confusion, disappointment, and finally a flash of something that might have been relief. Well, if you change your mind, the offer stands. For now, anyway. After he left, Tori stood on her porch watching his borrowed horse disappear down the mountain path. Through the trees, she could see smoke rising from chimneys in the valley below, families starting their day with the comfortable certainty of their place in the world. Women cooking breakfast for husbands and children, men heading out to work that gave them purpose and identity. The creak of wagon wheels on the path drew her attention to an approaching buggy. Her heart sank as she recognized the driver, Widow McAllister, the unofficial matchmaker of 3 counties, known for her persistence and her ability to sniff out unmarried people from miles away. Morning, Victoria, the elderly woman called out, her voice cheerful despite the early hour. Saw young Hancock heading down the mountain. Looked a mite peaked, he did. Morning, Mrs. McAllister. Tori remained on her porch, hoping to keep this conversation short. Just a social call. The widow's sharp eyes missed nothing as she climbed down from her buggy with surprising agility for someone past 70. Heard tell you turned down the Patterson boy last month, and the Wilkins fellow before that. Getting quite a reputation, you are. I'm particular about who I spend my life with. Is that so wrong? Mrs. McAllister approached the porch, her expression softening with something that might have been sympathy. Child, you're 26 years old. Pretty enough skilled in ways that matter for frontier life. But you're also... She paused, clearly searching for diplomatic words. I'm also what intimidating, Mrs. McAllister said bluntly. Men want to feel needed, to feel like they're protecting and providing for their wives. You don't need protecting, and you provide quite well for yourself. That scares them. Tori felt a familiar flare of anger. So I should pretend to be helpless, like I can't take care of myself. I'm not saying what you should do, child. I'm telling you what is. You want a husband from around here, you're going to have to change, or, she paused, pulling a folded newspaper from her reticule. You might consider looking elsewhere. The newspaper was a month-old copy of the Denver Chronicle, open to a page filled with small advertisements. Mrs. McAllister pointed to one, circled in pencil, gentleman seeks correspondence with educated lady for possible matrimony. Must be strong of character and spirit. Western Territory experience preferred. Write to J. Sterling, Copper Falls, Colorado Territory. Territory men are different, Mrs. McAllister explained. They appreciate a woman who can pull her own weight, handle hardship. Might be you'd find better understanding out there. Tori stared at the advertisement, her mind racing. Colorado Territory. She'd heard stories about the mining towns, the fortunes being made and lost, the kind of rough and tumble life where a woman's unconventional skills might actually be valued rather than merely tolerated. Think about it, Mrs. McAllister said, climbing back into her buggy. But don't think too long. Winter's coming, and I hear tell the bank's been asking questions about your father's debts. As the widow's buggy disappeared down the mountain, Tori remained on her porch holding the newspaper. Inside the cabin, her father's lockbox contained exactly $43 and some change enough to last another month, maybe 2, if she was careful. The bank held a mortgage on the cabin and the surrounding land, a debt her father had taken on during his final illness to pay for medicine that hadn't saved him anyway. She could try to make it through the winter by selling game and doing odd jobs for neighboring farms. Come spring, she might find work in town if any of the local businesses would hire a woman with her reputation for unconventional behavior. Or she could swallow her pride, accept Jeremiah Hancock's proposal, and spend the rest of her life shooting rabbits under supervision. Or she could write a letter to Jay Sterling in Copper Falls, Colorado territory. That evening by lamplight, Tori composed her response. She was honest about her skills, her circumstances, her unwillingness to pretend to be something she wasn't. If this Jay Sterling wanted a woman of strong character and spirit, he was about to find out exactly what that meant. 3 weeks later, his reply arrived with the autumn mail. The letter was longer than her own, written in a clear, educated hand that spoke of genuine interest rather than mere desperation. Jay Sterling, whose first name she learned was Jackson, described himself as the owner of a silver mine in the Colorado Rockies, a man seeking not just a wife, but a true partner in building a life in the challenging but rewarding mountain country. Your honesty about your unconventional skills is refreshing, he wrote. The frontier rewards competence over convention. I believe you would find our mountain community more accepting of a woman with your abilities. By the time the first snow fell, Tori had made her decision. She sold everything she couldn't carry, paid what she could toward her father's debts, and used the remainder to purchase a train ticket to Denver and stage passage to Copper Falls. As the coach pulled away from the only home she'd ever known, she felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration that reminded her of that moment just before taking a difficult shot, the pause between aiming and pulling the trigger when anything seemed possible. The unexpected journey, the stagecoach lurched violently as it rounded another mountain bend, causing Tori to grip the leather strap hanging from the ceiling with white knuckles. 3 days out from Denver, the November weather had turned treacherous, with snow beginning to fall steadily as they climbed higher into the Colorado Rockies. Across from her sat Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, a Denver banker's wife, traveling to Copper Falls to visit her sister, and beside Tori hunched old Pete Morrison, a grizzled prospector heading home after selling his claim. Should reach Copper Falls by evening, Pete announced, squinting through the small window at the swirling snow. Assuming we don't get snowed in at Devil's Pass, Mrs. Whitman clutched her velvet reticule tighter. Surely the weather won't delay us that severely. My sister is expecting me for dinner. Pete chuckled, revealing gaps where several teeth had once been. Ma'am, you're not in Denver anymore. Mountain weather does what it pleases, and human schedules don't enter into it. Tori found herself caught between amusement and anxiety. She thought the North Carolina mountains had prepared her for Colorado, but the sheer scale of these peaks was humbling. Through the coach window, she could see snow-covered ridges stretching endlessly into the distance, their tops lost in low-hanging clouds. Somewhere ahead lay Copper Falls and Jackson Sterling, the man whose letters had convinced her to risk everything on this journey west. The coach suddenly jerked to a halt, throwing all three passengers forward. Pete was the first to recover, pulling aside the leather window covering to peer outside. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "What is it?" Mrs. Whitman demanded. "Road's blocked. Looks like a big pine came down across the pass." Pete opened the coach door and climbed out, his boots crunching in the fresh snow. "Hey, Charlie," he called to the driver. "How bad is it?" Charlie Hutchins, the stage driver, appeared at the door looking grim. "Bad enough. Tree's too big to move, and there's 3 men with rifles standing behind it who don't look like they're here to help." Mrs. Whitman gasped. "Highwaymen." "Afraid so, ma'am." Charlie's weathered face was apologetic but resigned. Best to do what they say and hope they just want money. Tori's hand instinctively moved toward the hidden pocket in her traveling dress, where she kept her father's Colt revolver. She'd been careful to conceal the weapon during the journey, knowing that armed women made people nervous, even in the supposedly progressive West. But as Boots approached the coach and rough voices called out demands to step out nice and easy, she was grateful for its weight against her hip. The 3 bandits looked exactly like the outlaws from dime novels, unshaven, dirty, with the hard eyes of men who'd chosen violence as their profession. The leader, a tall man with a scar running from his left ear to his jaw, gestured with his rifle for the passengers to line up beside the coach. "Now then, Isha," Scarface said, his voice carrying the lazy confidence of a man who'd done this many times before. "This is real simple. Empty your pockets, hand over your valuables, and nobody gets hurt. Charlie, you know the drill, strongbox too." Charlie reluctantly climbed down from the driver's seat, producing a key to unlock the small safe mounted beneath his seat. Well, Whitman was sobbing quietly as one of the bandits, a younger man with nervous eyes, took her jewelry and purse. Pete handed over a small leather pouch with philosophical resignation. "Your turn, Missy," Scarface said, turning his attention to Tori. "That's a mighty fine dress you're wearing." Bet there's some nice things in them pockets. Tori met his gaze steadily, her mind calculating distances and angles. The leader was 6 feet away, his rifle pointed casually in her direction, but not aimed with deadly intent. The nervous young bandit was distracted by Mrs. Whitman's jewelry. The third man, older and more careful, was watching Charlie, but standing too close to the coach for a clear shot. I don't have much, she said, making her voice small and frightened. Just a few dollars for travel expenses. Well, let's have a look anyway. Scarface stepped closer, reaching out to pat down her coat pockets. Sometimes ladies hide things in the most interesting places. The moment his hand touched her coat, Tori moved. Her right hand swept the hidden opening in her dress and drew the Colt in one fluid motion, while her left hand grabbed Scarface's rifle barrel and pushed it away from her body. The revolver's barrel pressed against his throat before he could react. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice now carrying the calm authority she'd used to manage spooked horses, "I suggest you reconsider your business model." The tableau froze. Nervous eyes at Mrs. Whitman's side started to raise his pistol, but Tori shifted her aim slightly, without moving the gun from Scarface's throat. "I wouldn't. At this range, I can put a bullet through your friend's brain and still have time to put 2 more in you before you clear leather." "Now see here, miss," the older bandit began, but Charlie Hutchins interrupted him. "I listened to her boys, saw her practicing her draw yesterday at our noon stop. Faster than anything I've seen since Wild Bill Hickok came through Denver." It wasn't entirely true. Tori had only spent a few minutes cleaning her weapon, but Charlie's voice carried convincing admiration. More importantly, the bandits could see her steady hands and professional grip on the Colt. This wasn't a frightened woman waving a gun around. This was someone who knew exactly what she was doing. "Here's what's going to happen," Tori continued. "You're going to put down your weapons, move that tree off the road, and disappear into these mountains. In exchange, I won't put holes in you." "You're bluffing," Scarface said, but his voice lacked conviction. The cold metal against his throat was entirely too real. "Am I—" Tori pulled back the hammer with an audible click. "Would you like to find out?" The nervous young bandit cracked, first dropping his pistol and raising his hands. "Jake, maybe we should just—" "Shut up, Danny," Scarface snapped, but his own confidence was clearly wavering. Being held at gunpoint by a woman dressed for traveling wasn't part of his usual script. The standoff might have continued longer if not for the sound of approaching hoofbeats. 6 riders appeared around the bend, moving fast despite the snow. Tori recognized the lead rider immediately from the photograph he'd sent Jackson Sterling, her intended husband, along with 5 other men who had the look of armed miners. "Looks like the cavalry's arrived," Pete Morrison observed with evident satisfaction. The bandits found themselves caught between Tori's gun and 6 approaching rifles. The mathematical disadvantage was overwhelming, and even Scarface could count. Within minutes, the 3 outlaws were disarmed and trussed up like Christmas turkeys, while Sterling's men worked to clear the fallen tree from the road. "Miss Blackwood, I presume." Jackson Sterling approached the coach, removing his hat despite the falling snow. He was taller than she'd expected, with dark hair showing silver at the temples and the kind of steady eyes that suggested competence under pressure. "I'm Jackson Sterling. I heard shots and thought you might need assistance." "Mr. Sterling." Tori holstered her revolver with the same fluid motion she'd used to draw it. "I was handling the situation, but I appreciate the timely arrival." His eyes took in the subdued bandits, the frightened passengers, and Charlie's obvious relief. "I can see that. Charlie, any injuries?" "No, sir, thanks to Miss Blackwood here. Coolest thing I ever saw, the way she handled these road agents." Sterling's gaze returned to Tori, and she saw something in his expression that she'd never seen from the men back home, respect mixed with genuine interest rather than fear or confusion. "Well then, Miss Blackwood, it seems Copper Falls is fortunate to have you joining our community. Shall we continue to town? I believe supper is waiting, and you must be eager to see your new home." As they prepared to resume the journey, Mrs. Whitman approached Tori with tears in her eyes. "Thank you, dear. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here." "You're quite welcome," Tori replied, then added with a small smile, "though I suspect it will make for interesting Penner's conversation in Copper Falls." Sterling overheard and chuckled. "Miss Blackwood, I have a feeling that interesting conversation is going to be the least of what you bring to our town." As the stagecoach resumed its journey toward Copper Falls, now escorted by Sterling and his men, Tori reflected on the day's events. In less than an hour, she'd gone from anonymous passenger to local legend. The story would spread through Copper Falls before she'd had time to unpack her bags, establishing her reputation before she'd even met her new neighbors. It wasn't the quiet arrival she'd planned, but as she watched Jackson Sterling ride alongside the coach, alert, competent, clearly impressed rather than threatened by her skills, she began to think that perhaps this journey west had been exactly the right decision after all. Welcome to Copper Falls. The town of Copper Falls materialized from the swirling snow like something from a frontier dream. Wooden buildings lined a wide main street, their yellow lamplights spilling warmly onto the snow-covered boardwalks. Beyond the commercial district, Tori could see neat rows of houses, climbing the hillside, smoke rising from dozens of chimneys into the early evening sky. It was larger than she'd expected, more established, with the feel of a community that had moved beyond mere survival to actual prosperity. Population just hit 800 last month, Jackson Sterling called out, riding alongside the stagecoach as they entered town. Growing every week as word spreads about the Silver Strikes. We've got a school, 2 churches, a proper hotel, and the finest saloon between Denver and Salt Lake City. As if summoned by his words, the saloon doors swung open and several men stepped onto the covered porch, drawn by the unusual sight of an evening stage arrival with armed escort. Word of the roadside encounter had clearly preceded them. Tori could see recognition and curiosity in the faces that turned toward the coach. "Jackson," called a tall man with a physician's bag slung over his shoulder. "Heard you went hunting bandits. Everyone all right?" "Better than all right, Doc Hayes," Sterling replied, dismounting as the stage pulled up in front of the Copper Falls Hotel. "Miss Blackwood here sent 3 road agents packing single-handed. Quite an introduction to Colorado territory. Dr. Michael Hayes approached the coach with the confident stride of a man comfortable with his place in the community. He was perhaps 35, with intelligent brown eyes, and the kind of steady presence that inspired confidence in both medical emergencies and social situations. As he helped Mrs. Whitman down from the coach, Tori noticed the way his gaze lingered on her with unmistakable interest. "Miss Blackwood," Dr. Hayes said, extending his hand as she stepped down. "Michael Hayes, town physician. Welcome to Copper Falls. I understand we owe you quite a debt of gratitude." "No debt necessary, doctor. I simply did what the situation required." Tori accepted his handshake, noting his firm grip and the calloused hands that spoke of practical work but was beyond his medical practice. "I'm pleased to meet you." "The pleasure is entirely mine," Hayes replied, holding her hand perhaps a moment longer than strict propriety demanded. "I hope you'll find our community welcoming. We appreciate people who can handle themselves in difficult circumstances." Sterling stepped forward, and Tori caught a brief flash of something annoyance competition in his expression. Miss Blackwood must be exhausted from her journey. Perhaps introductions can wait until tomorrow. "Of course," Hayes agreed smoothly, but his smile suggested this was merely a postponement, not a retreat. "Miss Blackwood, I hope you'll allow me to show you around town once you've settled in. We have quite a few amenities that might surprise someone expecting a typical frontier settlement." As her bags were unloaded, Tori found herself the center of attention from a growing crowd of townspeople. The story of the roadside encounter was spreading with the speed of wildfire, growing more dramatic with each telling. By the time they reached the hotel lobby, she'd apparently single-handedly defeated 5 No-6 desperate outlaws in a running gunfight that lasted 20 minutes. "Now that's enough excitement for one evening," declared a commanding voice from the hotel's front desk. The speaker was a woman in her 50s with iron gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Miss Blackwood needs rest and a hot meal, not a crowd of gawkers treating her like a carnival attraction." "Miss Blackwood," Sterling said, "may I present Mrs. Catherine Morrison, owner of the Copper Falls Hotel and the closest thing we have to a mayor. Catherine, this is Victoria Blackwood." Mrs. Morrison's appraising gaze took in Tori's travel-worn dress, steady bearing, and the way she naturally held herself apart from the crowd. "So you're the mail-order bride who's got the whole town talking. Well, you look like you have more backbone than most women who come west chasing husbands. That's good, you'll need it." "I beg your pardon." Tori was taken aback by the woman's bluntness. "Oh, don't mind Catherine," Sterling said quickly. "She speaks her mind, but she means well." "I mean exactly what I say," Mrs. Morrison corrected. "Jackson Sterling is a good man and a fair employer, but he's also the richest bachelor in 3 territories. That means he's got half the unmarried women in Colorado setting their caps for him, plus a few married ones who might develop sudden widowhood if the opportunity arose. Dr. Hayes laughed. Catherine, you're going to scare Miss Blackwood back to North Carolina before she's even seen her room. If she scares that easily, she doesn't belong here anyway, Mrs. Morrison replied tartly. The mountains don't coddle anyone, and neither do I. She turned back to Tori. But if you're as tough as you appear, you'll do just fine. Room 12 is yours, top of the stairs and to the left. Jackson's arranged for your meals, and there's hot water for a bath whenever you want it. As the crowd gradually dispersed, Sterling approached Tori with an expression that mixed pride and concern. I apologize for the reception. News travels fast in a small town, and it's been a while since we've had anything this exciting happen. Mr. Sterling Jackson, I appreciate your concern, but I'm quite accustomed to being the subject of local gossip. It comes with the territory when you're a woman who doesn't fit conventional expectations. About that, he said, lowering his voice, your letters mentioned your unusual skills, but I confess I didn't fully appreciate what that meant until today. I hope you don't think I misrepresented myself, or my expectations. Tori studied his face, looking for signs of the discomfort or condescension she'd grown accustomed to from men back home. Instead, she saw genuine curiosity and what appeared to be admiration. And what are your expectations, Mr. Sterling? A partner, he said simply. Someone strong enough to build a life in challenging country, intelligent enough to handle whatever this territory throws at us. Today proved you're both of those things and more. Before Tori could respond, Dr. Hayes appeared at her elbow with a cup of hot coffee. Thought you might need something to warm you up after that cold ride. He said his manner friendly, but with an undercurrent of something that suggested his interest went beyond mere hospitality. Thank you, doctor. That's very thoughtful. Tori accepted the coffee, gratefully aware that she was now the focal point of some sort of subtle masculine competition. It was a novel experience back home. Men had competed to avoid her attention, not gain it. Michael, Sterling said with forced casualness, don't you have patients to check on? Actually, no. It's been a remarkably healthy day in Copper Falls. Amazing how good weather brings out the best in people's constitutions. Hayes's smile was innocent, but his eyes held a challenge. I was hoping Miss Blackwood might join me for dinner. I'd love to hear more about her journey west. Miss Blackwood is dining with me, Sterling said firmly. We have business to discuss. Business? Hayes raised an eyebrow. How romantic. Tori set down her coffee cup with enough force to make both men look at her. Gentlemen, I appreciate your hospitality, but I'm perfectly capable of making my own dining arrangements. As it happens, I'm exhausted from traveling and would prefer to eat in my room tonight. Perhaps tomorrow we can all have a civilized conversation about the future. Mrs. Morrison appeared as if summoned by the tension. Good sense, she announced approvingly. Miss Blackwood, I'll have dinner sent up to your room. Jackson, Michael, you can continue your peacock displays somewhere else. My lobby isn't a stage for male posturing. As Tori climbed the stairs to her room, she could hear the two men conducting a carefully polite argument in the lobby below. Through her window, she could see the lights of Copper Falls spreading across the valley, a testament to human determination to build civilization in the wilderness. Somewhere out there was the silver mine that had made Jackson Sterling wealthy, the source of the prosperity that allowed this town to thrive. But as she unpacked her few belongings and prepared for her first night in Colorado territory, Tori couldn't shake the feeling that she'd walked into something more complicated than a simple mail-order marriage arrangement. Dr. Hayes's obvious interest, Sterling's possessive response, Mrs. Morrison's warnings about competition, it all suggested that her arrival had disrupted some carefully maintained balance in the community. Through the thin hotel walls, she could hear the sounds of a frontier town settling in for the night, the distant music from the saloon, the clip-clop of horses on the snowy street, the murmur of conversations from the rooms around her. Tomorrow she would begin the process of deciding whether to make this place her home, whether Jackson Sterling was the man his letters had suggested, whether she could build the life she dreamed of in these mountains. But tonight, as she cleaned her father's revolver and reflected on the day's events, Victoria Blackwood allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. For the first time in her adult life, she was in a place where her unconventional skills were seen as assets rather than embarrassments. Whatever challenges lay ahead, at least she was finally where she belonged. Secrets in the silver mine. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the snow-covered peaks surrounding Copper Falls glittering like diamonds in the early sunlight. Tori had slept better than she had in months, lulled by the mountain silence, different from the restless creaking of her old cabin. She dressed carefully in her best day dress, a practical blue wool that could handle whatever the day might bring, and made her way downstairs to find the hotel dining room already bustling with activity. Jackson Sterling rose from a corner table as she entered, his face lighting up with genuine pleasure. "Good morning, Miss Blackwood. I trust you slept well." "Very well, thank you." She accepted his offered chair, noting that he'd chosen a table with a clear view of the entire room, a habit that suggested either paranoia or practical caution. In mining country, she suspected it was the latter. "I thought today you might like to see the mine," he said, pouring coffee from a silver pot that spoke of prosperity beyond mere comfort. "Understand what you'd be partnering with if you decide to accept my proposal." The proposal, in all the excitement of yesterday's arrival, they hadn't actually discussed the practical arrangements of their potential marriage. "I'd like that very much. Though I should mention that my father taught me quite a bit about mining operations. I may have more questions than you expect." Something flickered in Sterling's expression, surprise perhaps, or wariness. "Your father was in mining, engineering specifically. Before the war, he designed ventilation systems for the coal mines in Pennsylvania. He always said that most mining accidents could be prevented with proper planning and adequate investment in safety measures." "Wise man," Sterling agreed, but his tone had become more careful. "Mining is indeed a dangerous business. We take every precaution, of course, but there are always risks." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Hayes, who approached their table with the easy confidence of someone sure of his welcome. "Good morning, Miss Blackwood Jackson. Beautiful day, isn't it? Perfect for showing our newest resident around town." "Miss Blackwood is touring the mine today," Sterling said, his voice carrying a subtle emphasis on the possessive pronoun. "How fascinating," Hayes replied, settling into an empty chair without invitation. "I'd love to join you if you don't mind. I haven't been up to the workings in months, and it would be good to check on the miners' health conditions." "I'm sure the men are fine, Michael." Sterling's jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly. "Your last inspection found no problems. That was 6 months ago, before you opened the new shaft. Different working conditions, different health considerations." Hayes turned to Tori with a smile that managed to be both charming and professional. "Miss Blackwood, given your interest in mining and your background in medical care, your letters mentioned helping with illness in your community. You might find the health aspects particularly interesting." Tori caught the subtle tension between the two men and decided to diffuse it. "The more perspectives, the better my understanding. I'd welcome Dr. Hayes's company if Mr. Sterling doesn't object." Sterling clearly did object, but good manners prevented him from saying so directly. "Of course. The more the merrier." An hour later, the three of them were riding up the winding mountain path toward the Sterling silver mine. The town spread out below them like a detailed map. The mine entrance was larger than Tori had expected, a sophisticated operation with multiple shafts, a steam-powered hoist system, and rows of neat buildings housing equipment and ore processing facilities. "Impressive," she said, meaning it. "How deep do the main shafts go?" "The original workings go down about 300 feet, Sterling explained, dismounting near the main entrance. "But the new shaft, the one we opened this spring, goes down nearly 500. That's where we're finding the richest veins." As they approached the mine entrance, Tori noticed several men emerging from what appeared to be the newer shaft. Even from a distance, she could see they looked tired more than the normal fatigue of hard work. One was coughing persistently, and another seemed to be having trouble breathing in the thin mountain air. "How many men work the new shaft?" she asked. "About 40 on each shift," Sterling replied. "We run 3 shifts to maximize production. The silver market has been particularly strong this year." DeHay Hayes had noticed the same things Tori had. "Jackson, some of these men look unwell. When was the last time you had a full medical inspection of the new workings?" "The men are fine, Michael. Mining is hard work. Of course, they're tired at the end of a shift." But Tori's trained eye, honed by years of caring for her community during her father's decline, saw more than normal fatigue. The persistent coughing, the pallor. The way some men moved as if breathing was difficult. These were signs of something more serious than mere exhaustion. "Mr. Sterling," she said carefully, "might I ask about the ventilation system in the new shaft? My father always said that inadequate air circulation was the most common cause of health problems in deep mines." Sterling's expression had become guarded. "The ventilation is adequate. Our engineers assured us of that before we began the excavation." "Engineers can be wrong," Tori said, thinking of her father's stories about cost-cutting measures that sacrifice safety for profit, especially if they are under pressure to minimize expenses or maximize speed of development. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Dr. Hayes was watching Sterling with growing suspicion, while Sterling himself looked like a man caught between competing loyalties. Finally, he said, "Perhaps we should return to town. Miss Blackwood has seen enough for her first day." "Actually," Tori said, her tone pleasant but firm, "I'd very much like to see the new shaft. If I'm going to be a partner in this operation, I should understand all aspects of it, shouldn't I?" The words hung in the air like a challenge. Sterling could hardly refuse without seeming to hide something, but his reluctance was obvious. The new workings are still being developed. It's not really safe for visitors. "I'm not exactly a typical visitor," Tori pointed out. "I've been in mines before and I understand the risks." Dr. Hayes stood abruptly. "Jackson, I'm going to examine some of these men. Miss Blackwood, if you'd like to observe, you might find it educational." What they found was deeply troubling. Of the dozen men Hayes examined, 8 showed signs of respiratory distress, 3 had developed distinctive skin lesions, and 2 were running low-grade fevers despite the cold mountain air. Most telling of all, every affected man worked primarily in the new shaft. "This isn't normal mining fatigue," Hayes said quietly to Tori as they moved away from the workers. "This looks like exposure to some kind of toxin. Poor ventilation could concentrate harmful gases or dust particles to dangerous levels." Tori nodded, remembering her father's warnings about arsenic-bearing ores and the importance of proper air circulation in deep workings. "Mr. Sterling," she called out, "I'd like to speak with your mine foreman about the ventilation systems." "The foreman is busy with production schedules," Sterling replied, but his evasiveness was becoming more obvious. "Perhaps another time." "Jackson," Dr. Hayes said, his voice carrying the authority of both medical expertise and longtime friendship. "These men need medical attention, and they need it now. Whatever's happening in that new shaft, it's making people sick." For a moment, Sterling looked like a man torn between competing pressures. Then his shoulders squared with sudden resolve. "All right, but what I'm about to show you doesn't leave this mountain. There are too many people depending on this mine for their livelihoods." He led them to a small office building near the mine entrance and produced a key to unlock a filing cabinet. The documents he retrieved told a story of corners cut and warnings ignored, engineering reports recommending expensive ventilation improvements that had been filed away, safety inspections that had been postponed repeatedly, and most damning of all, correspondence with Denver investors that painted the mine's prospects in glowing terms while ignoring the mounting evidence of problems. "The truth is," Sterling said, his voice heavy with something between shame and desperation, "the new shaft was a gamble. We needed to find richer ore to satisfy our investors, and we needed to find it quickly. The engineering firm we hired promised they could cut development time in half with some innovative approaches to ventilation and support structures." "Innovative?" Tori's voice was sharp. "Or cheap?" "Both," Sterling admitted. "The mine's finances aren't as solid as they appear. We've been operating on borrowed money and borrowed time, hoping the new strike would pay off before anyone noticed the problems." Dr. Hayes was studying the medical implications with growing alarm. "Jackson, if these men are being poisoned in working conditions you knew were questionable, you're not just risking their health, you're risking manslaughter charges if anyone dies." "I know that." Sterling's composure finally cracked. "Do you think I don't know that? But if I shut down the new shaft now, the mine goes under. 800 people in Copper Falls depend on sterling silver for their livelihoods. What happens to them if the mine fails?" The question hung in the mountain air like smoke from a distant fire. Tori found herself looking at Jackson Sterling with new eyes, seeing not just the confident mine owner who had courted her through letters, but a man caught in an impossible situation of his own making. A man whose choices had put dozens of workers at risk and might destroy the community that depended on him. A man who had brought her here under false pretenses, whether intentionally or not. There has to be another way, she said finally. A solution that protects both the workers and the community. If there is, Sterling replied. I haven't found it, and time is running out faster than I care to admit. As they rode back down to Copper Falls in troubled silence, Tori realized that her new life in Colorado territory was going to be far more complicated than she had ever imagined. The question was no longer whether she could build a life with Jackson Sterling, but whether she could help him find a way out of the moral and financial maze he had constructed around himself, and whether in the end that was something she wanted to do at all. The real power behind the throne. That evening, Tori found herself invited to dinner at the Sterling Mansion, an impressive two-story house perched on a hill overlooking Copper Falls. The building spoke of wealth and permanence with its wraparound porch stained glass windows and carefully tended grounds that must have required considerable effort to maintain at this altitude. As Jackson helped her down from the carriage, she noticed armed guards stationed discreetly around the property, an unusual precaution that suggested all was not as peaceful as it appeared. Welcome to my home, Jackson said, though something in his tone suggested uncertainty about whether it would become her home as well. I should warn you that my sister will be joining us for dinner. Helen manages the household and, well, she has strong opinions about most things. Before Tori could respond, the front door opened to reveal a woman who immediately commanded attention. Helen Sterling was perhaps 40, with dark hair streaked with premature silver, and the kind of striking features that suggested beauty had once been hers by right. But it was her bearing that truly impressed. The way she held herself spoke of someone accustomed to authority and unafraid to exercise it. So you're the famous Victoria Blackwood, Helen said, extending a gloved hand in greeting. Her voice was cultured with traces of an Eastern education, carefully maintained despite years in the frontier. The woman who's turned our quiet little town upside down in less than 24 hours. Miss Sterling, I hope I haven't caused too much of a disturbance. On the contrary, my dear, disturbance is exactly what this place needed. Helen's smile was sharp as a knife blade. Please come in. Dinner is ready, and I'm eager to hear your thoughts on our humble community. The dining room was elegantly appointed with furniture that had clearly been shipped from back east at considerable expense. Crystal glasses caught the light from an ornate chandelier, and the table was set with china that probably cost more than most families in Copper Falls earned in a year. It was beautiful, impressive, and somehow felt more like a stage set than a home. Jackson tells me you visited the mine today, Helen said as they were seated. How did you find our operation? Tori glanced at Jackson, who was studying his soup with unusual intensity. Impressive in scale, though I did notice some concerns about working conditions in the newer sections. Ah, yes, the new shaft. Helen's tone was carefully neutral. Jackson's great gamble. We've invested so much in that project, haven't we, brother dear? Helen, Jackson warned. Oh, don't worry. I'm sure Miss Blackwood appreciates honesty. After all, if she's to become part of this family, she should understand exactly what she's signing up for. Helen turned her attention back to Tori. Tell me, my dear, what did you make of Dr. Hayes' charming man, isn't he? The sudden change of subject seemed calculated to unsettle, but Tori had grown up dealing with mountain politics, where every conversation carried multiple meanings. He seems very dedicated to his patients' welfare. Indeed he is, sometimes to a fault. Michael has this troublesome tendency to put medical concerns ahead of economic realities. It's noble, of course, but not always practical in a place like Copper Falls. Jackson set down his spoon with enough force to make the crystal ring. Helen, perhaps we could discuss something else? But this is exactly what we should be discussing, Helen replied smoothly. Miss Blackwood is considering joining our family. She needs to understand the challenges we face, the delicate balance required to maintain prosperity in an uncertain industry. What kind of challenges? Tori asked directly. Helen smiled approvingly. Straight to the point. I like that. Very well, the challenge of maintaining investor confidence while dealing with operational difficulties. The challenge of balancing worker safety with production demands. And most critically, the challenge of managing troublesome individuals who might jeopardize everything we've built here. The threat in her words was subtle but unmistakable. Tori found herself revising her assessment of the Sterling family dynamics. She had assumed Jackson was the decision-maker with Helen playing a supporting role. Now she wondered if the reverse might be closer to the truth. Jackson mentioned that the mine's finances are somewhat precarious, Tori said carefully. Perhaps there are solutions that could address both the safety concerns and the economic pressures, such as Helen's eyes had sharpened with interest. Temporary measures to improve ventilation while seeking additional investment. Honest communication with current investors about the challenges and the timeline for resolution. Sometimes people are more understanding than we expect when they're told the truth. Truth, Helen repeated as if testing the taste of an unfamiliar wine. An interesting concept, but in my experience, truth tends to panic investors and workers alike. Fear spreads faster than fire in a community like this. Jackson had been growing increasingly uncomfortable during this exchange. Helen, I don't think this is appropriate dinner conversation for Miss Blackwood's first evening. On the contrary, it's exactly appropriate. Helen rose from her chair and moved to the window, gazing out at the lights of Copper Falls below. Miss Blackwood, you strike me as an intelligent woman. You've seen the problems at the mine, heard Dr. Hayes' concerns, observed the tension between my brother and the good doctor. What do you think should be done? The question felt like a test, though Tori wasn't sure what answers Helen was looking for. I think the workers' health should be the first priority. After that, finding a way to address the underlying problems without destroying the community that depends on the mine. And if those two priorities conflict, if protecting the workers means shutting down operations and throwing 800 people out of work, then you find a third option. Helen turned from the window, her expression unreadable. A third option. How refreshingly optimistic. She returned to her seat, but something in her demeanor had changed. Jackson, Miss Blackwood, is not what I expected. Is that good or bad? Jackson asked, and Tori heard genuine uncertainty in his voice. It's interesting. Helen picked up her wine glass and regarded Tori over the rim. Tell me, my dear, what do you know about the Denver investors Jackson mentioned? Very little, only that their continued support is apparently crucial to the mine's operations. Indeed it is. They're arriving next week for an inspection tour. Their decision about additional funding will determine whether Sterling Silver survives or fails. And their decision will be based primarily on what they observed during their visit. The implications were clear. Whatever problems existed at the mine needed to be hidden or resolved before the investors arrived. Tori was beginning to understand the pressure Jackson had been under, the impossible choices that had led to the current crisis. What happens if they withdraw their support? She asked. The mine closes, Helen said bluntly. Copper Falls becomes a ghost town within 6 months. Everyone who depends on Sterling Silver for their livelihood, which is essentially everyone in the valley, loses everything. And Dr. Hayes' medical concerns become irrelevant. Helen's smile was cold. Dead towns don't have health problems. Jackson had remained silent during this exchange, but now he spoke up. There has to be another way. Some solution that doesn't require choosing between people's health and their survival. Your optimism is touching, brother, but misguided. Sometimes hard choices are the only choices. Helen turned back to Tori. The question is whether Miss Blackwood has the strength to make such choices when necessary. The rest of dinner passed in uncomfortable politeness, with conversation carefully steered away from controversial topics. But Tori's mind was working furiously, processing everything she'd learned about the Sterling family dynamics, the mine's problems, and the complex web of pressures facing Copper Falls. As Jackson escorted her back to the hotel, she found herself studying his profile in the moonlight. Your sister is a formidable woman. That's one word for her, Jackson replied with what might have been resignation or admiration. Helen has managed the business side of our operations for years. She has an excellent head for finance and strategy. And you handle the day-to-day operations. In theory, his laugh was rueful. In practice, Helen makes most of the important decisions. I've been content to let her. She's better at it than I am. It was an admission that revealed more than Jackson probably intended. Tori was beginning to suspect that Helen Sterling was the real power behind Sterling Silver, which raised troubling questions about who was actually responsible for the decisions that had created the current crisis. Jackson, she said as they reached the hotel, tomorrow that I'd like to speak with some of the miners directly. Get their perspective on working conditions and any health concerns they might have. He stopped walking. Tori, that might not be wise. If word gets back to Helen that you're asking questions, what would happen? I don't know, he admitted, and that's what worries me. As Tori climbed the stairs to her room, she reflected on the evening's revelations. She had come to Copper Falls expecting to evaluate Jackson Sterling as a potential husband. Instead, she was discovering a community trapped in a web of economic desperation and moral compromise, controlled by a woman whose priorities seemed to begin and end with maintaining power and profit. The question was no longer whether she could build a life with Jackson Sterling. The question was whether she could help him and the people of Copper Falls escape the trap they had built around themselves, and whether Helen Sterling would allow such an escape to happen. Uncovering the truth, the next morning Tori rose before dawn and made her way quietly through the empty streets of Copper Falls. Her destination was the miners section of town, a collection of modest cabins and boarding houses, where the men who actually did the dangerous work of extracting silver from the mountain made their homes. She had learned from her father that if you wanted to understand a mining operation, you talked to the miners themselves, not the men in the offices. The first wisps of smoke were rising from chimneys as families began their morning routines. Tori found what she was looking for at Murphy's boarding house, a weathered building where unmarried miners rented rooms by the week. The front porch was already occupied by 3 men, sharing coffee and preparing for the day shift. "Morning, gentlemen," she said, approaching, with the friendly directness that had served her well in North Carolina's mountain communities. "I'm Victoria Blackwood. I believe some of you might have heard about my arrival yesterday." The 3 men exchanged glances. The eldest, a grizzled veteran with silver in his beard, spoke for the group. "Heard you sent some road agents packing with nothing but a pistol and nerves of steel. Name's Patrick Murphy. This is my place. These are Tom Wilson and Billy Kowalski. Pleased to meet you all. I was hoping you might spare a few minutes to talk about working conditions at the mine. I'm considering permanent move to Copper Falls, and I'd like to understand what life is really like here." Tom Wilson, a man in his 30s with a pale complexion that spoke of months underground, laughed bitterly. "Life's just fine, miss, if you don't yet mind coughing up blood and wondering if each shift might be your last." "Tom," Murphy warned, glancing around nervously. "What?" She asked an honest question. She deserves an honest answer. Wilson turned back to Tori. "Miss Blackwood, you seem like good people, so I'll tell you straight, that new shaft is killing us. Half the men working down there are sick, and it's getting worse every week." Billy Kowalski, barely out of his teens, nodded emphatically. "My pa worked coal mines in Pennsylvania before we came west. He taught me to recognize the signs of bad air. That new shaft has some of the worst ventilation I've ever seen." "Have you reported these concerns to the mine management?" Tori asked. The 3 men exchanged another look, this one heavy with frustration and fear. "Miss Blackwood," Murphy said carefully, "reporting concerns to the Sterling family is a good way to find yourself looking for work in another territory. Helen Sterling don't take kindly to complaints about her operation. What about Jackson Sterling? Surely he'd want to know if his workers are in danger." "Mr. Jackson's a decent enough fellow," Wilson acknowledged, "but he ain't the one making decisions about the mine. That would be his sister, and she's got ice water in her veins when it comes to anything that might cost money or slow production." As they talked, other miners began joining the conversation, drawn by curiosity about the woman who had already become a local legend. Soon Tori found herself surrounded by a dozen men, all eager to share their experiences and concerns about working conditions at Sterling Silver. The picture that emerged was deeply troubling. The new shaft had been excavated with minimal attention to ventilation, resulting in dangerous concentrations of dust and gases in the working areas. Several men had developed persistent coughs, skin irritations, and respiratory problems that Dr. Hayes had been treating with limited success. Most alarming of all, 2 miners had died in the past month under circumstances that suggested exposure to toxic materials. Doc Hayes wanted to write to the territorial authorities, Murphy explained. But word came down from the Sterling house that any such letters would result in the immediate termination of anyone involved. "Helen Sterling threatened Dr. Hayes?" Tori asked, her voice sharp with outrage. "Not directly," Wilson said, "but the message was clear enough. The Sterlings own this town, miss. Cross them and you're finished." Billy Kowalski had been growing increasingly agitated during the conversation. Finally, he burst out, "It ain't right. Men are dying so Helen Sterling can squeeze every penny out of that mountain. Someone needs to stand up to her." "Easy, boy," Murphy cautioned. "Talk like that will get you worse than fired." "What do you mean?" Tori asked. The older man's expression darkened. "Miss Blackwood, there's been accidents in that mine. Cave-ins that happened to men who asked too many questions. Equipment failures that seemed mighty convenient for getting rid of troublemakers. I'm not saying the Sterlings are directly responsible, but—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. The implication was clear enough, and it sent a chill down Tori's spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "There's something else you should know," Wilson added, lowering his voice and glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard. "The Denver investors aren't coming just to inspect the mine. Word is they're coming to decide whether to pull out entirely. If they do, Helen Sterling has a backup plan." "What kind of backup plan?" "She's been in contact with a mining syndicate from California. They specialize in buying up failing operations, stripping out whatever silver they can find, with minimum investment, then abandoning the sites. It would mean a few months of brutal, dangerous work for whoever stays, then nothing. Copper Falls would be finished." The implications were staggering. If Helen Sterling was willing to sacrifice the town's long-term future for short-term profit, then the situation was even more desperate than Tori had realized. And if she was willing to arrange accidents for workers who opposed her, then anyone who threatened her plans was in serious danger. "Why hasn't anyone contacted the territorial authorities?" Tori asked. "With what proof?" Murphy replied. "The Sterlings own the local sheriff, and they're careful to keep their hands clean. Everything looks legitimate on paper. It's only when you're down in that shaft, breathing poison air and dodging falling rocks, that you realize what's really happening." As the miners dispersed to begin their shifts, Tori found herself with a crucial decision to make. She could remain silent, marry Jackson Sterling as planned, and hope that somehow the situation would resolve itself. She could return to North Carolina and leave Copper Falls to its fate. Or she could take action knowing that opposing Helen Sterling would put her in considerable danger. The memory of her father's voice came back to her. "Sometimes, Tori, doing the right thing is the hardest thing, but it's the only thing that lets you sleep at night." Her decision made Tori return to town to find Dr. Hayes waiting for her outside the hotel. His expression was grim, and she suspected he had news that would complicate her already difficult situation. "Miss Blackwood," he said, "we need to talk privately. There are things happening in this town that you need to know about before you make any permanent decisions about your future here." "I think I'm beginning to understand that, Doctor." "What's happened?" "Another miner died last night, Jim Crawford, one of the men working in the new shaft. Officially, it was a heart attack brought on by the exertion of hard work. Unofficially," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "Jim Crawford was 28 years old in perfect health and had been asking questions about safety conditions for weeks." The implication hung in the mountain air between them like smoke from a distant fire. Tori felt a cold certainty settling in her stomach as she realized that the stakes in Copper Falls were higher than she had imagined, and that time was running out faster than anyone wanted to admit. "Dr. Hayes," she said quietly, "I think we need to have a very long conversation about Helen Sterling and what she's willing to do to protect her interests." "I was hoping you'd say that," he replied, "because I have a feeling that you might be the only person in Copper Falls with the courage to stop her." The confrontation that evening, Helen Sterling's invitation to tea, we arrived at the hotel with all the courtesy of a royal summons. The note was brief and elegantly written. "Miss Blackwood, I believe we have matters to discuss that are best addressed in private. Please join me at 7 this evening. Most cordially, Helen Sterling." Tori spent considerable time deciding what to wear for this meeting. Her instincts told her it would be more confrontation than social call, so she chose her most conservative dress, while ensuring that her father's derringer was easily accessible in the hidden pocket she'd sewn into the waistband. Her conversation with Dr. Hayes that afternoon had painted a picture of Helen Sterling that was far more dangerous than she had initially realized. The Sterling mansion seemed different in the evening light, its elegant facade unable to disguise the sense of menace that had settled over the property. The same armed guards were stationed around the grounds, and Tori noticed that they watched her approach with more than casual interest. Whatever Helen Sterling wanted to discuss, she was taking no chances on being interrupted. Helen received her in a private sitting room that managed to be both luxurious and intimidating. Persian rugs covered polished floors, Oil paintings and gilt frames adorned the walls, and a fire crackled in a marble fireplace that probably cost more than most families earned in a year. Helen herself was dressed in black silk that emphasized her pale complexion and silver-streaked hair, creating an effect that was both striking and somehow predatory. "Miss Blackwood, how good of you to come. Please sit down. I've had Cook prepare some of her excellent pastries, and the tea is a special blend I have shipped from Boston." Tori accepted the offered chair, but remained alert, every sense tuned for danger. "Thank you for the invitation, Miss Sterling, though I suspect this isn't entirely a social call." Helen's laugh was like silver bells, with a slightly discordant note. "How refreshingly direct. Yes, you're quite right. We have business to discuss, you and I. Important business that concerns the future of this entire community." "I'm listening." "Good." Helen settled into her own chair with the fluid grace of a predator settling onto a branch. "Miss Blackwood, you've been in Copper Falls for 3 days now. In that time, you've toured the mine, spoken with Dr. Hayes, and I'm told had conversations with some of our workers. You've formed opinions about our operation, haven't you?" There was no point in denying it. "I've observed some concerning conditions, yes." "And what do you intend to do with these observations?" The question was asked with casual curiosity, but Tori heard the steel beneath the silk. "I intend to encourage your brother to address the safety concerns before someone gets seriously hurt." "Someone has already gotten seriously hurt, my dear. Several someones, in fact. The question is whether we allow those isolated incidents to destroy everything we've built here." "Isolated incidents." Tori's voice sharpened. "Miss Sterling, the miners I spoke with, described systematic safety violations that are making men sick and putting lives at risk." "The miners you spoke with are disgruntled employees looking for someone to blame for the inherent dangers of their profession." Helen's tone remained conversational, but her eyes had gone cold. Mining has always been dangerous work. Men accept that risk when they choose the profession. They accept reasonable risk, not negligent endangerment. Negligent endangerment. Helen savored the phrase like fine wine. Such a legal-sounding accusation. "Tell me, Miss Blackwood, who would make such an accusation and to whom?" The threat was becoming less subtle with each exchange. Tori met Helen's gaze steadily. "Anyone with a conscience and access to the territorial authorities." "Ah, yes, the territorial authorities. The same ones who take weeks to respond to complaints, who rely heavily on the testimony of local officials, and who understand that the economic stability of entire communities sometimes requires flexibility in how regulations are applied." "You're saying the authorities would ignore evidence of safety violations?" "I'm saying that the authorities understand the difference between idealistic theory and practical reality." Sterling Silver employs 800 people directly and supports virtually every business in Copper Falls. The territorial government isn't going to jeopardize that kind of economic activity based on the complaints of a few workers or the medical theories of a country doctor. Helen rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the lights of the town below. "Miss Blackwood, you seem to be under the impression that this is a simple moral issue, that we should choose worker safety over economic survival. But life is rarely that simple. If we shut down the new shaft to address these supposed safety concerns, we lose the Denver investors. Without their funding, the entire mine closes within months. 800 families lose their livelihoods. Copper Falls dies. Is that really the moral choice? It is if the alternative is allowing men to be poisoned or killed by preventable hazards." "Preventable." Helen turned back to face her. "You use that word as if we had unlimited resources to implement perfect safety measures. The reality is that mining is a business, and businesses must balance competing priorities. Sometimes men get hurt. Sometimes men die. It's tragic, but it's not necessarily anyone's fault. It's someone's fault when safety measures are deliberately ignored to save money." "Prove it." The challenge was issued with quiet confidence. "Prove that we've deliberately ignored safety measures. Show me the documentation of willful negligence. Provide evidence that couldn't be explained by reasonable business decisions made under difficult circumstances." Tori realized she had walked into a carefully constructed trap. Helen Sterling had been covering her tracks too well for casual observation to provide the kind of proof that would convince skeptical authorities. The older woman was far more clever and dangerous than Tori had initially realized. "Miss Sterling," she said carefully, "what exactly are you asking of me?" "I'm asking you to be practical. You came to Copper Falls seeking a secure future as Jackson's wife. That future is still available to you, but only if you understand the realities of life here. Some things are more important than individual concerns, the welfare of the entire community, for instance. And if I can't accept those realities," Helen's smile was sharp as winter wind, "then I'm afraid Copper Falls wouldn't be a suitable home for you after all. You'd need to find somewhere else to build your future. Somewhere far from here where your concerns wouldn't create problems for the people who depend on sterling silver for their survival." The threat was now explicit. Tori could conform to Helen's expectations, or she could leave town. The implication of what might happen if she chose neither option hung unspoken in the air between them. "I see," Tori said, rising from her chair. "Well, Miss Sterling, you've given me quite a lot to think about. I believe I should discuss this with your brother before making any decisions." "By all means. But remember, Miss Blackwood Jackson understands the realities of our situation better than anyone. He knows what's at stake here, and he knows what needs to be done to protect it." As Tori prepared to leave, Helen delivered one final warning. "Oh, and Miss Blackwood, I should mention that Dr. Hayes has been called away on a medical emergency, a mining accident in the next valley. He'll be gone for several days, possibly longer. I'd hate for you to worry about his absence." The message was clear. Dr. Hayes, her potential ally, had been removed from the equation. Whether by legitimate emergency or by Helen's arrangement, Tori was now effectively alone in a town controlled by a woman who had made her position unmistakably clear. As she walked, the camera slowly pulls back from the peaceful valley of Copper Falls, now bustling with honest prosperity. Children play in the streets where once fear ruled. Victoria Blackwood came to Colorado seeking safety after losing everything. She found something far more valuable, a purpose that honored all she was rather than what others wished her to be. Soft fade to the mine entrance, now properly ventilated with healthy workers emerging into daylight. The price of change was steeper than any mountain peak. Jackson Sterling traded his family's approval for his own integrity. The miners gained their lives but lost their innocence about the cost of silver. And Helen Sterling, well, some debts can only be paid in full. Final shot, Victoria teaching her young daughter to shoot both silhouetted against the sunset. In the end, true freedom isn't found in perfect choices, but in making imperfect ones with clear eyes and honest hearts. We all stand at crossroads, not of our making, forced to choose between the path of least resistance and the road that honors our deepest truth. The mountain peaks glow one last time in the fading light. What might we build if we refuse to diminish ourselves for others' comfort? What healing might we bring to our own fractured communities if we dared to be exactly who we are, fade to black? The mountains remember everything, and some stories echo forever.